if you had all the time in the world and you're just sitting there and by the power that you have in your brain, just to sit down and try to figure it out. Let's say it's possible. Let's go to Exodus. Next book. When you go to Exodus, we're going to find the first tau, count 49 letters, and we're going to get Rev. And then you're going to count 49 letters again, and we're going to get Rev again. And then you can probably guess, after 49 letters, we have He. Once again, in Exodus, we read Torah. Okay, so the pattern continues. Whatever the probability was in the first Genesis, you're going to have to score that in order to get this again. So the probability just jumped quite high. It's going to be very, very difficult for a human to actually sit down and design this. Let's continue. Leviticus. Ready? There's no pattern. So like, oh, okay. So I guess it was a coincidence, right? Let's continue with numbers. And whoever had a lot of time, because back then, guys, there's no supercomputers. You can't just put this in a computer and say, you know what, give me all the combination of what letters possible. Back then, they had to sit down and study this. Go to the first letter, and in this case, this time, we have Re first. Okay? He first. Count 49 letters, and then we get Res. We're going to count another 49 numbers, and we're going to get Rav. Count another 49 numbers, we're going to get Tau. If you read this, it happens to be Torah backward. They were like, something's up here. So let's continue. They went to Deuteronomy, and exactly the same thing happens. The moment they count the 49-letter intervals in this Deuteronomy as well, they found Torah backward. So what's our missing link then? Leviticus is our missing link, so that whoever studied this went back and studied Leviticus one more time. Here's your first verse of Leviticus. And instead of using 49-letter intervals this time, they decided to use 7-letter interval. Okay? The first letter, Y, I can't read that. When they picked all the letters of the 7 letters interval in the first verse of Leviticus, guess what it's spelled? YHWH, Yahweh. If you look at all 5 books of your Torah, all the letters, all the word that we have put, Torah always points towards Yahweh. Torah always points to our God. Isn't that right? Remember how Nick said all the languages points towards Jerusalem? God has designed it so that the Bible does exactly the same. All the Torah points towards Jesus. Whatever the Bible talks about, or whatever the 5 books of the Bible talks about, the Torah talks about, it all points to Jesus. And at that point, I was just like, wow. I was like, whew. And I had to take a break. And I came back again. And I thought, one more. I'm going to share one last thing. I had so many examples. I just wanted to give you all, but this is one last example, my favorite. Okay? Let's look at Camp of Israel. Actually, who read Numbers from first to very last word? At one sitting. Maybe you have read it, but at one sitting. It's Numbers made up of a lot of numbers, isn't it? I think I read the first chapter about 5 times, and I don't know if I did the whole thing because I'm doing chunks a bit, because it's just so boring. It is so boring. I got numbers after numbers after numbers, right? Now, I didn't know how to enjoy the book of Numbers until somebody showed me this. In Numbers, the camp of Israel is described in such a detail. Number of feet of the tabernacle, how the tabernacle is supposed to be designed, where are you supposed to be living, which camp are you supposed to be in, and all that, right? Now, as described in Numbers, you have a tabernacle right in the middle. And we have north, west, south, east. On the north side, we have the camp of Dan, and the total number of the people that were camping was 157,600. On the west side, we have camp of Ephraim. 108,100 people were camping on the west side of the tabernacle. On the south side, there's a camp of Reuben. 151,450 people were camping on the south side of the tabernacle. On the east side, we had a camp of Judah. 186,400 people were camping on the east side of the tabernacle. And all these numbers, I'm just doing you a favor because all these numbers, you're going to have to add it up. It's how many people have, in a small camp, you have this many people who belong to the camp of Dan, this many people belong here, this many people belong there. If you add them up, those are the total numbers you get. And after a careful calculation, because if you think about it, let's imagine that everybody had the same size tent. Okay? That means according to the number of people that we have on each tent, you're going to have certain area that you occupy. Okay? And when you do that careful calculation and laid out us pictures on how much space they will need to make sure that they had enough room for that many people, on the east side, let's say it was that many, and actually did my calculation and put it in properly. On the north side, it was this many, this wide. Okay, whatever camp occupied that much space. On the west side, on the south side was on this side, and on the west side was this much. When Balaam was going up the mountain to cross that mountain, this must have been what he was looking down from the top of the mountain. I'm sure nobody had helicopters back then, but if you were able to take a picture of it from the bird's eye view, this is exactly what it was in the middle, our God sitting in the middle of the tabernacle. Isn't that amazing? But it's not done yet from here. Each of the camp had a flag that represent their own camp. If you look at the camp of Dan, it was an eagle, and an ox for an offering, and Reuben had a man, and east was a lion. If you just look at the Old Testament, if you're just looking at the numbers, okay, that's nice, that had a symbol. Right? That's nice. But let's go back to the last book of the Bible. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 6b-7, it says, "And in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature like a calf, the ox. The third living creature had a face like a man. And the fourth living creature was like a flying eagle." Is it a coincidence just because John knew about it, just because John read about it, that he actually was able to get this? We have just proved just now over many examples, many of the many examples that we had, that God had everything in control. God knew exactly what his men wanted to write before he studied the first person to write the first word. Before he gave the comment for the